We're in the mood for a breakdown.
And today we are going to break down moods. And whoa,
Through the medium of a
dance.
live breakdown.
No, we have to edit that out, Daisy. We can't.
The start was gold.
So hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Be Well During Turbulent Times. Is that what we're calling ourselves? We have neither a proper name nor a proper soundtrack yet, but I am determined and willing and able to do both, especially the soundtrack. So keep you posted. But we noticed that minding your mood is one of the recommendations of the government wellbeing strategy, looking after yourself in these times. And we were wondering, because we were like, do we know enough about what mood means and how you mind your mood? And so we decided for the last week to go off and do some research and come back and tell each other what we had found out. And so that's what we're going to do. Isn't that right, Daisy?
That is correct, Grace. I'm also anticipating this soundtrack that you speak of and hoping that there might be some power chords in there.
You will be dance to it because we will dance again.
Does that include moshing and headbanging? So the first thing that struck me about if anyone looks up the government spiel about mind your mood, there are lots and lots of techniques and tips for what to do to, I suppose, change your mood from negative to positive, which is cool. But as Grace said, we kind of thought we would delve in a little bit into what's behind the word. And like my first reaction was that the expression mind your mood is interesting for me and it's a nice expression because it kind of frames it for me in a way that says, like, if you're minding anything, there's a way of doing that. It's not about taking full control of something and having it present at all times and being locked in. It's about paying attention to something because it's significant or important at different levels. So if you're minding a goldfish for your friend while they're gone on holidays, or you're minding like a dog or you're babysitting or something, there's something about minding that says this is important, but it also, for me, gives a sense that you pay attention to it. But it doesn't have to be full attention 24 hours of the day, every waking moment. So I think that's significant. And it actually links quite well with what I've understood or discovered about mood as a thing.
Yeah, and it reminds me of like mood boards, or like, on like Pinterest, when people like decide the ambience or mood of a room. Like, you don't do it all day every day. You don't make your room be a sanctuary, but you might spend a Saturday one day putting plants up or a salt lamp or those kind of things. And it's kind of, I think my understanding of mood anyway, it's kind of similar. And I'm going to ask you what we define mood as, but your emotion is more short-term, I think, reaction to something that's happening, whereas your mood might be a little bit longer, the context within which it's happening. So for me, spending a little bit of time setting the context of minding your mood means then when good or bad emotions happen within that, maybe handling them will be a little bit different. Does that resonate with you, or what do you mean by mood?
Yeah, like my instinct was taking me to like how I see it expressed. So I'm not in the mood. And if everyone was to think of how often do you say I'm not in the mood and in what context, or if someone says, this is not the worst, someone saying, are you in a bad mood?
Find out now in a minute.
And that's something. So that tells me that there's something about how we signal our mood, or what are the signals that come from the mood that we're in. So what has triggered those? So I would say, similar to you, that a mood is a response to a stimulus, to something. So good mood, bad mood, not in the mood. It also strikes me that a mood can be influenced or triggered by lots of things. So it can be something that's happening outside of you in the world. It can be something that's happening inside of you. Or it can be another person, or it can be, as you said, the environment around you can impact on your mood, or can trigger or stimulate. So it's really, it's certainly, I would say that it wouldn't have been as interesting to me until I went off having a deeper look at how significant mood is. And even like that mood was relevant back in the caveman days, that it's something that serves us as humans, because it gives us, it tells us something about how we are in the moment. And then it invites us to decide, or to recognize, if I'm in a low mood, then what next? If I'm in a high mood, then what next? If I'm not in the mood, what the hell does that mean? But there's still a what next to it. So that was something that really struck me.
And something we wanted to try challenge ourselves to do is understand the science a little bit of moods, right? Because we tried to, your brain obviously is where all of these. So I'm going to stop for a sec. Can you hear him walking around? Okay, it's so loud. Hang on, just give me 1 second.
I can't hear it.
Can you not? Okay.
No.
It's distracting me so fierce.
Okay.
Where was I in the thing? I was going to talk about the. Oh yeah.
Chemicals.
Now I feel bad because you probably heard me say that. Anyway, I'll ring him. Our floorboards are so squeaky though. I don't know what it is. Anyway, sorry.
Floorboards are squeaky.
Yeah. So we wanted to understand the brain and the brain science a little bit about moods, because sometimes it can seem, it's hard to, if you don't understand why something is happening, physically, you can think that it's kind of all just fluffy or whatever. But there's a real brain science to this. And our brains, and you alluded to it there, like come from caveman times. And I think we're catching up evolutionary wise to how this machine inside our heads work. But what we do know is that it's our brains are plastic. It's called neuroplasticity. So the brain changes like a muscle. So just like the way if you lift up something heavy every day, your biceps get bigger. You can change the shape and functioning of your brain with practice, and I would say routine and a little bit of maybe discipline or habits. And there is there's 4 different chemicals we think that are would you call them chemicals that are involved with mood, and each one can be promoted by doing different activities. So we thought it would be a good idea to kind of go through some of them and try give our non-scientist explanations of what they are, but they are based in science and therefore very real. Is that a fair assumption?
It's a fair assumption to say we're not scientists. I think that's very fair.
I'm not going to talk about my science career in school because I was just so bad. And then I was squeamish as well, and that's the whole thing. So the first chemical that I want to talk about is dopamine. And it is known, I have my notes here, the reward chemical. So like, and maybe this reminds me of, when people are like, I'm in the mood to be productive. I wonder, is that because, when you have a to-do list and there's 10 things on it and you get 5 of them done, you're like ready to do the next 5. And so dopamine would be what's released in your brain when you complete a task, or you achieve something. You get celebrating little wins, it says, doing self-care activities. And it's so interesting because that could happen and you're not aware it's happening, and then you don't know why. Sometimes you're in the mood to be productive or look after yourself or not. But if you are aware of what's making you be in the mood to be productive or looking after yourself or achieve something, then you know to promote those little habits. Are you ever productive?
Yeah, but and I really think it's so, like you said already, intention is part of that also. So there's something about how we can decide to try, like, so something was interesting that I discovered as well is that, I think it's a really interesting expression that, when you're not in the mood and you're like, I'm not motivated to do this. But I would speculate that if you force yourself to do it, so how often do you be not in the mood to go for a run, but you decide to go for a run, and then you're happy you went for a run, or during the run, it's doing you good?
Yeah, no, not during ever. but after definitely. Well, sometimes during. I tell you what it is like when you're. So if I'm doing a long distance run, until you get about 2/3 of the way in, you're like, oh, that's the worst. But then when you're in the final stretch, you're like, yes. So and that can be true of even taking your vitamins. Like when you don't see the reward in the moment, it can be hard to make yourself do something. But if you're aware that that will make you in the mood to be more productive or more energetic or whatever in the future, you're more likely to do it in the moment.
Yeah, and that's about kind of getting a sense of how much control you might have, or believing that, you know, that sometimes the motivation comes after the action. So if you're waiting for it to be motivated, like to do the tasks that you've set yourself, if you're like, I'm not in a mood, I like now, Mr. Procrastination here is not the excellent model of, but I believe that even if I'm not in the mood and I get cracking by the third task, I'm motivated because the dopamine has kicked in. So I think it is solid science.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to do the second chemical?
Or do I get to pick?
Yeah, pick your phone.
So maybe I'll go with the endorphin. Well, yeah, and that's an interesting one because it's known as the painkiller. And so that's like, yeah, we're wondering like, so what do we do usually when we need to kill pain? People make decisions about that might be risky or might be unhealthy. Because if we're in pain or we want to numb our pain, there's a lot of go-to options for that aren't so healthy. But like some of the suggestions about like some alternative and maybe more healthy options for that might be like, again, finding ways to laugh, because that is counteracting, I suppose, a kind of a negative and pain meaning not just the physical pain. There's also, like our go-to things. And again, these are kind of like, what's your go-to food for comfort?
Chili Doritos. Actually, all types of crisps, but also chocolate. Like I hit all the major food groups. So you've got a nice drink, then you've got crisps, then you've got chocolate, and maybe you even need some sour sweets, depending on the situation that's ahead of in front of you. What's yours?
Yeah, like very similar. I'd be adding some hummus to those Doritos, and I'd be adding some extreme to those sour sweets. I'm mad for the.
I can't do sour at all. It's so funny. I just can't. So, but I still try. But isn't it? I think there's a caveat here, and some of the reading I was doing was that what's so interesting is that minding your mood is different for every person. So, while we know that the painkiller of endorphins, yeah, we're saying to laugh, but sometimes, okay, in the situation you're in, if something is really, really, really bad and you can feel your feelings and not feel good, you'll be like, oh, I can't watch a comedy. I don't feel like laughing, and that's okay. And like, running for me might be my dopamine hit, but it could be meditation for you or whatever. So through all of this, what's really important is that each person's methods of minding their mood will be dependent on who you are, but also the situation that you're in. So there's times when I'm grumpy, and I know that if I'm like, oh, I don't want to watch a comedy with my family, but ultimately 10 minutes in, we'll start messing and they'll slag me for being grumpy. And then I'll be like, is it right? I am grumpy, and laugh. That'll work. But if I'm really, really struggling with my mood, like sometimes laughter can be hard to do. So it's about choosing what's right for you in the moment as well. But again, knowing that maybe it's chili Doritos and hummus that I need right now for my little pain killer hit, then that's okay. Yeah,
I think that's really important to recognize. And the more we do, like, again, for some people, exercise is an endorphin, like produces that release. But for others, it's not feasible, or that type, or exercise means a different thing.
Yes.
And it's really back to that space where if you recognize the mood that you're in, and then you decide to do something about it, then if you have a menu of options, then you're in more control than you would have been if you didn't know that there was a menu of options or weren't aware of what you might do next.
Yeah.
Give us another one.
All right. So serotonin is the mood stabilizer, apparently. So things like meditating, running. Oh, listen, I should be the most stable of all humans. Ask the people I live with. Sun exposure, walk in nature, swimming, cycling. But they all seem like things that kind of, I'll tell you why running works for me, or I know a lot of people are swimming at the moment. When there's stressors, and we also know the chemicals involved in stressors, like cortisol gets released and other chemicals that I don't remember, but they have to come out somehow. And so I wonder, as a lot of people swimming every day, and I know for me running every day, it kind of gets rid of that adrenaline. And then I'm not in excess adrenaline, so I'm more stable. But also at the same time, you know, sitting in sun, getting your vitamin D, bringing things back to this like homeostasis, this balance. And you mightn't even know you're out of balance until after you've done the things that produce the serotonin. And I think it's really cool that, you know, the dopamine hit and the serotonin hit could both come from a nice walk or checking in with nature. And then you know that you're getting a little bit of a reward hormone, but you're also getting a bit of a stabilizer. And then maybe later on this evening, you might feel different than if you hadn't done those things.
I think that's really good. And I think the last one that I'm going to mention also adds to that. And it tells us what it tells me that I love is the fact that there's a pattern of the good stuff and what it does for you. So if you go for walks in nature, it can only be good. And you can solidly believe that. And I suppose if you don't, then you're missing that possibility. And again, some people don't and can't, and that's grand. But when I go back to the menu has a lot of options that work across the different chemicals. So there are some really solid positive things available to do that will give you multiple positive reactions, I suppose, especially in terms of chemicals. And it kind of relates back to the social, I suppose, the social solutions a little bit. Or solutions that are available to you that don't require medical intervention as such. And I suppose we qualify everything by saying that mood, you know, is something that when there's a threshold for negative mood that might require then a medical intervention. But the last one is oxytocin, which is known as the love hormone. And it's probably, you know, we talked about this before, how is this the chemical that's getting the least amount of action during a lockdown? And why I say that is that if oxytocin is released by touch, by, like, I don't know how many of you out there are huggers or who rely on, I actually have the last person I hugged outside of my family home was in March, like a colleague, you know, when you meet someone who's a friend or a colleague and you give them a hug. So that means that aspect of life is absent. And I suppose as well, like how deeply connected we might be to members of our family that we haven't seen possibly during lockdown, or friends. So the release of that chemical, maybe on the lower end. So if we think oxytocin is something that is produced when, like, if you have a pet, you're playing with your dog. Now, I've had pets down through the years, but more so, I know I'm not a pet lover, but when you know someone who is, and the depth of the connection, it's unreal. I suppose as well for me, like, music is a big one. And again, like how you connect with it can release that hormone. One of our 5 a day that we would be strong on is contribute, and that's doing something. So oxytocin will be very much connected with empathy as well, but doing something for someone, doing selfless or random acts of kindness, they produce oxytocin, or even giving a compliment. It produces, it's that thing about, again, we wouldn't go off the deep end on this, but you feel good when you are intentionally and authentically trying to make someone else feel good. There's a loop there that's really, that can be very positive and lovely.
I think that it is so mad that music can release that as the same as a hug, because it's that thing of you're like plugging in to the universal human experience. And we're all like, I saw a thing the other day, a video, and it was a funny video, and it was talking about how cute humans are. And I was like, what? And it was this guy talking about the fact that humans have doorbells on their houses just to let each other know when they're there. And that when you think about it, that's really cute. And like that for me gives me that hit, because it's like we're all in this thing, this world together, and have similar experiences. And that's very, very strong. And again, that's probably empathy. And I wonder, like, yeah, something that I'm thinking, because I'm running, say, a lot more than I would be in my normal life. Am I upping the dopamine levels that I'm getting to make up for the fact that I'm hugging people less and getting less I can't say it,
Oxytocin.
Oxytocin. That's why I left it to you. Do you see? For you to have to do the. But yeah, and I think it's cool to, again, when you're mindful or you understand it a little bit more, you can try to find creative ways in this time to promote it anyway. And something that came up in my research that I think is so interesting is that there is a belief that humans regulate each other's moods, especially leaders. So if there's a leader in a social group who's always or often in a low mood and angry mood, then that impacts the moods of the others. I mean, they've done studies where even they'll sit two people opposite each other in a room, and for the first 15 minutes, they're individual entities, but after 15 minutes, their heart rates start to align and other things. So we are connected. And so minding your mood can be a way to contribute, because if you are, especially in lockdown in a house, and again, like, I am lucky that the people I'm living with are looking after their moods and trying to then help me, and that influences me. But if you're looking after your mood, you might have a positive impact on the other people that you're currently locked down with, who might be struggling, both by being an example, but also like this kind of subconscious way.
And if you like, that's so huge and relevant, I think, during COVID, because if we look at the key, now I'm small time in this sense, but I know what it's like. So as an educator, and over the last 8-9 months, I've had to present myself online as someone who is facilitating or delivering content to groups of people, sometimes young, sometimes older, or professionals. And the mood I'm in to deliver the content is really, really important. And I have to be on the ball in that regard, that I can't be having a morning of and then go into a group of 20 people and deliver content on mental health or on sustainable development or an important topic to them. So they're coming in with an expectation. And whereas if I'm in a group, like in a physical sense, and then I can feed off the energy that's there, and it again, that environment thing that you talked about. Whereas online, it's different, but I still have to take responsibility for my own mood and how I contribute to the vibe in the room. And then if you expand that out to much more important people like me, such as frontline workers. So imagine the nurses of Ireland, or the firefighters of Ireland, the emergency services, teachers who are looking out into a sea of masked children in secondary schools. And like you say, they are the leader of that space, and their mood will permeate across the room. And what legends, like, and to be able to recognize that the power of that and the responsibility is huge, but to still do it, to find a way, I think is phenomenal. And that's why it's I would say it's so important to try and recognize, because the flip side is also true. If you're caught in, one of the things that I learned about the risks of mood is if you're caught in a negative mood. So if your mind, so sometimes when we are in a situation, we might go into our brain to like figure out what is the cause of this and what is the solution to this. And you get caught in that world. It's like, why am I feeling like this? And what do I have to do? Why? And then your brain is you've sent a signal to say, why is this happening? And the brain's like, let me go and check. And what it'll do is it'll go and do a search of all the similar echoes of that emotion. And what it'll do is it'll remind you of all the other times you felt like that. So what
Oh.
it's doing, the risk is it's dragging you down into that dark place to say, here's another example of when you felt like that. And when you know the way you're feeling so worthless right now, there's another example of that. There's another example of which is whereas, and that's the risk. And I think it's a slippery slope. It's not like you could find yourself there without realizing, because you're really trying to figure out, why is this happening to me? Like, whereas if we go into our mindfulness practice, and we look at how we say thoughts aren't real sometimes, or if we use that practice of saying, for me anyway, I would say observe, recognize, and then watch it float away, especially if it's a memory. So if I'm in a mood, I recognize that I'm in that mood. Like I was saying that the other day, like watching the rugby on Saturday. So I'm a sports victim. So for me, sports is competitive, it's battle, it's an arena, and I got to take a side. Whether it could be tiddlywinks between two insignificant nobodies, and if I'll be like, which side am I on? And then I invest myself into that side, hoping that they'll win, willing them to win, and then if they lose, it wrecks my buzz. But I'm aware of that. I know it still happens, but for me, it's like, there I go again, like caught in like raging because Celtic lost, and it could ruin the rest of my day. Or I could recognize it and say, yeah, you've got me. And then just let it float away and make a choice about what I do next to transform into another mood. And sometimes for me, it's like telling people, oh, I did it again. Like I tell my kids, like, who don't watch sports with me, who won't even be in the same room as me, because they know I'll have a howler. But I think it's so there's something about our power to recognize, accept, and then there's that space and that's again, we go to take a moment, take a breath, present it as a cloud or see it moving, and then like create space so that you can make a choice about what next. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it does. It so makes sense. And it's very real, because like I remember when I first started doing gratitude journaling, I hated it. And I was like, this doesn't make me feel different in the moment. I'm not all of a sudden like Thich Nhat Hanh, like transcending all bad in the world. I still feel miserable. And anyone who says that you can change that is wrong, blah, blah, blah. But over time, by just saying, right, I'm going to be curious and explore if this positively impacts my mood, it really helped. And I guess it was giving a balance too. So step one, yes, is being, when your brain is giving you all these memories and it's like a negative bias towards why you feel in this mood and pulling you down, and you try offer an alternative. There's almost it's that metaphor, that fable that's like, I have two wolves fighting in my head, and it's like, which one survives? And the one I feed. And so if your brain is automatically feeding the negative one, it takes effort and it's energy, and sometimes you're really tired, but you don't know the payoff until you really give it a good shot and be curious about if it works for you. Now, having said that, I forget to do my gratitude lists all the time, but I'm not forgetting to do my running. I'm not forgetting to do my other check-ins. And, I found what really works for me. And so that's really important to say, is that, again, this is over time, and it's a challenge, no doubt, sometimes, but there are things you can do to influence it. Is the key thing that we want to try and get across.
Have you ever heard of sympathetic joy? So that's a practice where this is hardcore now, and it reminded me when you're saying about doing your gratitude list practice, and how and I think it's important that it's not instant that you feel, because when you commit to something as a practice, that word means you'll try and try and try. And sympathetic joy is kind of, in a very rough sense, it's about it's also a practice where you kind of imagine like something good happening to you, and you feel the joy of that, and that you feel that. Then you imagine something good happening to somebody that you love, and you kind of feed off the joy of that. So that's like the vicarious joy of someone else's buzz. Then you imagine someone that you're an acquaintance that you don't know so well, but you do know them, and you imagine something good happening to them, and you tap into it, and you try to feel the joy of that. And then it goes on a sliding scale to someone. Yeah. to someone who you know but you don't necessarily have great connection with, and ultimately down to someone who you fundamentally dislike. And you challenge yourself to imagine something nice or something good happening for them, and whether or not you can feel the joy of that. And ultimately the challenge is to feel joy for them if something good is happening to them. So regardless of, and it's trying to kind of, again, kind of flow against things like destructive stuff like envy, which is if you're spending your life looking at, and like in the world of social media, it's inviting you to compare yourself, and there's always judgment there, and you can get caught in an envy trap. But it's so interesting to just pick someone in your head that you clash with or that you don't like, and imagine something good happening for them, and saying, yeah, fair play. Like, no,
I'm gonna have to do that now, because I've been saying, oh, gratitude journal, everyone should try and do things that they don't feel like doing. I don't feel like trying to be joyful for someone who I don't like, but now I have to do it because it's practice what you preach and all that, right? I mean, but it's good practice, because ultimately, so the opposite is also true. It's not real positivity for you if you take pleasure in the pain of somebody else, regardless of who they are. That's negative. That's toxic.
And the flip side is true, that if you can feel joy for someone who is not so significant, and you don't even have a part in their joy, in the good that's happening to them, then you are a more joyful person, and that's going to benefit you. So it's back to that world of this, like how if mood is a response to the rhythm of your life, and if you get caught in a habit of negativity, or you kind of feel drawn towards it, then it can just start to seep into how you see the world and how you respond to anything. Like, I'm not in the mood to get up this morning, becomes, the world doesn't need me, I'm worthless, I'm like, or not in the mood to make the breakfast for my kids, or like some of this silly little ones. Like for me, it's like, what, even when it comes down to nutrition, like, I'm not in the mood to go and wash the strawberries, chop them up and give them to the kids. Instead, I'll just give them a bar. Like, whereas, and that's like a silly example, but like all those elements, I'm not in the mood to get dressed, to have a wash, to look after myself, to, and they can, and you're not saying I'm not in the mood, but it's happening. There's something there preventing you, or there's a barrier to, and if you get caught up in and that affects your view of the world, then you're going to transmit negativity more than positivity. And that's why for me, that thing about motivation is so important, that you shouldn't always be tapped into, I am motivated now to go and do the positivity or do the right thing. No, I do it because it's the right thing. I should do these things, and then if it ultimately you'll be doing the right thing and feeling good about it, but you don't have to be so consciously tapped into it.
And we know about motivation, not to go too off topic, but motivation can come from outside or inside. And so sometimes it can be okay, I think, if you're really, really struggling consistently with your motivation, to look after or to mind your mood, than to talk to somebody about it, or read a book about it, or watch a YouTube video about it. Those are external ways that you can get some, like I watch it, like I think I said this in one of the videos, I watch every morning a YouTube video about running, and like the method of, and he's a guy who just is like training, and he's like amazing, and it's like what he eats, and he makes cool videos, and then that makes me feel like I want to do something a little bit more. So, yes, it's about getting in the habit of doing things to mind your mood, even when you don't feel motivated to do it. But if you're really struggling with your motivation, it's even then deciding, okay, I'm going to try and motivate myself intrinsically by writing down why, how, what I do when I'm feeling not motivated, or reaching out to somebody else or something else out there to up my motivation.
Yeah, and I think it's the same for mood. It takes information from external sources and internal sources. So that's a fact. So like that, I if there's a group of people in front of me that are expecting me to deliver content by way of an education method, that is an external force that I must respond to, and how I respond is my responsibility, and I have an obligation to them. So I tap in. I must be able to tap into a positive vibe, and there's techniques for that, and that's, I think, part of it as well. Is that, ultimately, the last thing I would say is that when we recognize that mood affects how we think, it affects how we feel, and it has an impact on what we do. And when we recognize that, then we can be empowered to. We don't switch off. There's nothing about switching off mood. It's there. It ain't going away. It's been there since the beginning. But for me, it's like a notification. Like it's like, I pay attention now to it, and I create, if I need to create space for what next, or I let it fly by. It does its thing. I tap into it if it's positive. I acknowledge it if it's negative, and then I decide what to do next.
Yeah. And the final thing I would say on it is, let's not forget the core one, which is how well you sleep, which we, like, because that'll input. And I struggle with that one big time. I don't sleep well at all often. So it's to try and manage that and get better quality sleep, because I know the cumulative, like, the more you add good things for your mood, the better my mood will be in the future. So don't underestimate the power of rest and sleep as well, because they really do influence your mood.
We hope something from that made sense to someone somewhere. Go on, final word.
I was going to say I should also come up with outro music, because I feel like people would enjoy that as well. Next week's video is going to be tunes aplenty. Now, my final word would be that, finding out what works for you, even starting small with a bit of curiosity, can really change the way that your mood even affects you, or the mood itself. And yeah, it's one of those things that you have to try to do to believe it, but it's definitely exciting to try, and we would hope that something in this video sparks something that you might want to try yourself, and just see over a week, even write down every day if you can see any little bit of improvement.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Talk to you soon.